Hi, my name's Jerry Rackley, and I want to talk to you about corporate culture. I'm going to share some thoughts about what I think every leader, dean, coach, faculty member, religious leader, politician, anyone who's part of or who leads an organization needs to understand about culture. Let me begin by telling you where it came from. It came from my experience, almost 40 years of professional life in various organizations. You see some of the logos of places I've worked on the screen. I am an assistant professor of professional practice in the Spears School of Business at Oklahoma State University. And I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to have further dialogue with anybody about this topic of culture. So let's start by talking about why culture matters so much. And here's a story I just read. Back in 2013, Airbnb got a $200 million round of funding. One investor in particular contributed $150 million of this funding. The Airbnb CEO, Brian Chesky, sat down to meet with that particular investor and was really curious to know, what do you think is the most important thing we need to do? And you might think, well, that investor who just wrote a big check is probably going to say something like, well, pay attention to your margins or have a killer marketing strategy in place. What did he say? Well, here is almost the exact quote that he got in response. Don't foul up the culture. Actually, a different word than foul was used. But trying to keep this a little bit more family friendly, you get the idea how important this person who wrote a big check feels culture is. And he's right. This is another simple example of why culture matters so much. Allie Thomas posted this to LinkedIn. Allie's a former student of mine, so I immediately got my attention. And she ran a poll, and she asked, what's something you can't live without in a workplace? And you can see the four choices there. Culture won by a wide margin. So again, there's plenty of evidence and plenty of experience that people like me and others have that will tell you culture matters a great deal. And we therefore need to pay close attention to it and not let culture simply be accidental. So here's a few realities about culture before we go into some cultural truths that I want to share with you. The first thing is simply this. Culture is kind of hard to figure out sometimes in terms of its value or its worth because it doesn't show up on the balance sheet. There's no ratio or number we can go point to and say, there's culture. It's intangible. And we can't go touch it and bottle it up and share it as a tangible kind of thing. But that doesn't mean it's not important. But because it is intangible and it doesn't appear on a balance sheet, a lot of times it gets overlooked. Or worse, it gets downplayed. The assumption is that maybe it's just not that important because no one really sees it, right? Wrong. Everyone sees it. It influences everyone. And if you go to any successful organization, you're going to find that the X factor, what really differentiates it and what has had much to do with its success, is its culture. So that's why I pay so much attention to culture. As a professor, I come to culture over and over again in the classroom, and as I'm working with companies as a consultant, this is one of the first places I go. You have to pay attention to the culture. So I'm going to give you a real-life cultural episode, just so we can kind of get a glimpse of what culture does and how it works. And this is from my career. So here's a little bit of background. You see on the screen a message header from an email. And if you look at the date, this came from July 7th, 2006. And it should tell you something that I have kept this email message since that time. So this particular email was sent out on a Friday morning. It was from the CEO to everyone in the entire company. This particular company had about 600 employees. It was a multi-state organization. And if you looked at the workforce, about a fourth to maybe a third of the employees in this company were what we would call entry-level hourly wage employees. The rest were some level of professional to mid-management to upper management. So it was kind of the composition of this company. So here is the email message. It might be a little bit hard for you to read, but if you read this, it's just a very friendly, almost fatherly in tone, happy Friday email expressing some appreciation for the work everyone's doing and just sharing some wisdom And you can read this if you get close enough to the screen. Things like, once you decide you're going to settle for second, that's what happens to you. And the impossible is often the untried. And you can read these all the way through, and finally dance like no one is watching. Right? Nothing wrong with this. Encouraging, maybe inspirational to some, but it was just what was on the mind of the CEO that day and his effort to communicate with the entire workforce. Well, wouldn't you know it, one of those part-time hourly wage employees who was a college student decided to respond. And there's certainly a lesson here. Decided to do reply all. So I'm putting up on the screen that response. So I won't read through this with you, but as you go through, and I'll give you time to actually look at some of the responses, you can see that this particular employee's responses were a blend of snarkiness, for lack of a better term, and actually some maybe interesting insights, but in a kind of a funny way, perhaps pushing back a little bit on some of the gems of wisdom the CEO had shared. And it was all in good fun, and it was good-natured. And I remember looking at this response, reading this and going, uh-oh. And why did I go, uh-oh? Well, because I understood the culture at this particular company wasn't the greatest. It was kind of dysfunctional, and I feared for the future of this particular employee. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I think everyone who read this on that Friday kind of drew a collective gasp of, what will happen next? Well, it didn't take long for us to find out, but before I tell you what the outcome of this was, let me ask you. So put yourself in the shoes of the CEO. Now you're the leader in this situation, and you read the response that this one employee made to your Friday morning email message. What should you do about it? Well, let me give you some choices. You could do nothing, ignore it, act as if it didn't happen. You could actually fire the employee. I'm not going to stand for that. Get rid of the guy. Or you could counsel the employee. And here's something you want to remember before you make your choice, and that is everyone is watching, right? The email went out to everyone, so did the reply. Everyone is waiting to see what will happen here. So what this really is, among other things, is a cultural test. What kind of culture do we have? Now, before I reveal to you what happened, let's keep a couple of things in mind, or at least one thing, and that is the employees who were in this young man's position, these part-time hourly wage employees. As I said, this was a college student working his way through college. They had never received any training on corporate email etiquette or proper use of the corporate email system. And just assumed that they knew how to do email and didn't require any more training. All right, so back to what do you do here? A, B, or C? And maybe some of you are thinking, well, I'd like a fourth option. Well, I didn't give you four, I gave you these three, so what do you do? Well, in this actual example, what happened was B. And not only did it happened quickly. Within the hour, that employee was jerked up out of his chair, shown to the door, and everyone knew it. Many people witnessed it. Now, maybe you're saying to yourself, well, he deserved it. Shouldn't have done that. But think about this. Maybe that was just punishment for him, but what's the impact on everyone else? What does that do to everybody else, and what does that say about the culture? And I will tell you, in that organization that was already suffering from an unwillingness of employees to be candid in communications, it removed all future candor from all future dialogue. No one was willing to stick their neck out and take a chance to share an honest opinion. Is that the kind of culture that helps an organization? It's not. Anyway, just one of the many cultural episodes from my career that has really influenced the way I think about culture, teach about culture, and consult with companies about culture.